Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. We're very excited to have with us today Alan Schwab as well, who takes care of Informatica Cloud pre-sales. So we've got an exciting agenda for you today, and we're going to talk about why Salesforce reporting and compliance is so important. Now, Salesforce, by far, is the #1 CRM application in use today, and people really are using it for more than just CRM, and hence the need for reporting and compliance. So in today's agenda, I'm going to basically go over some of the main challenges with CRM as a whole. Then I'll go into why reporting within just the Salesforce application itself isn't enough. I'll go over some of the main challenges you may face within CRM reporting. Then I'll talk about some challenges specific just within the Salesforce ecosystem itself and where the concept of reporting and compliance fits in. And then we'll go into the topic of compliance and why it's so important for so many different industries and some of the consequences of not meeting regulatory compliance. We'll then transfer the floor over to Alan, who will take you to a demo of Salesforce data replication using Informatica Cloud. And then I'll take you through a brief snapshot of some of the customers that are using Informatica Cloud for data replication. And then we'll have a Q&A. So as far as CRM challenges go, data is still the #1 problem. In a recent survey done by Forrester this past June in 2013, they basically did a survey of a number of different customers as to what they think the future of CRM is going to be. And really, some of the challenges they found ranged from usability to system performance to integration, other functional deficiencies, but by far, the #1 challenge still remains with the data itself. Now let's talk a little bit about how you may be using Salesforce for reporting. Now, a lot of you that are on the call with us today know how to use Salesforce reports and Salesforce dashboards. So when it comes to ad hoc reporting and fast access to some of the dashboards within Salesforce, you've got that down straight. However, let's say you want to go one level deeper. You want to get some historical data and trending. Or if you want to get data from multiple data sources, for instance, you may have a marketing automation application like Marketo or Eloqua, or a Workday application or an Ultimate Software application from your human capital management system, or you may even have NetSuite for your cloud ERP or Concur for travel and expense, and somehow you need to get all this data into Salesforce for some more reporting. That's where the challenge lies. And that's because Salesforce has really gone beyond just being used for CRM and the Sales Cloud. It's really gone and diversified into the rest of the platform. And as this transition happens more and more rapidly, there are more challenges associated with Salesforce reporting. So here's another survey that was done by Dimensional Research, and it just proves the point I just made in that some of the challenges when it comes to CRM reporting, the #1 challenge is some of this what-if analysis. And if you want to do what-if analysis, you really need that historical data and trending information in order to do some predictive analytics on what future trends would be. And the #2 problem, as I stated, is combining the sales data with some of this other marketing, financial data, and data from other systems to get a more holistic view of how your company is operating. So as you can see from this particular survey, the #1 and #2 challenges with regards to CRM reporting specifically are to do with these two issues I just mentioned. So let's look at the Salesforce ecosystem itself. So Blue Wolf did a survey recently, and they did a survey on a number of different users of Salesforce. And they surveyed them on a number of different questions ranging from how they use Salesforce to the kinds of applications that are in use, the kinds of skill sets that are within their companies, to the kinds of technologies they integrate with. And they really came up with these 4 areas where people were facing challenges. And as you can see, the #2 area there was data. And it's reducing bad data, because when you have bad data, what ends up happening is you don't get enough Salesforce adoption. And as a result, the ROI of your entire Salesforce implementation project also goes down. And there's also gaining access to trustworthy data and data security and compliance. So that's actually a good segue to actually go into the topic of compliance. So we've now talked about Salesforce reporting, and let's talk about compliance and why that's necessary. So for those of you on the call today that are in highly regulated industries such as pharma, biotech, financial services, you may be familiar with some of these different regulatory acts that you have to comply with. HIPAA, for instance, or Sarbanes-Oxley is probably the most well-known compliance act out there, or the Gramm-Leach-Bailey Act, or the PCI DSS compliance, as well as the Sunshine Act. And as you can see, the penalties for violating some of these compliance acts can be pretty steep. Some of them involve not only prison time, but also steep fines that can range upwards of $1 million. And in some of these violations, the very individuals responsible for the violations can also be put into jail. So as you can see, compliance is extremely important, especially when you're using Salesforce for more than just CRM. It's now being used as more as a platform, which means there's going to be a lot of data coming in from multiple data sources being used within Salesforce. So while that's happening, you must make sure that you comply with all these different regulations. So let's look at some of the consequences of violating regulatory compliance and some of the fines that other companies have faced. For instance, Deloitte faced a $2 million fine for SOX compliance here because one of their CPAs was allowed to continue doing certain activities despite being suspended. Here's another example of a $4.3 million penalty being levied for HIPAA violations. And these fines are not just levied at big corporations. You also find small and medium-sized corporations that are being subject to some of these fines. Here's an example where the Federal Trade Commission fined this auto dealer out in Georgia for violating the Gramm-Leach-Bailey Act. So all types of companies, from the smallest to the largest Fortune 100 companies, are subject to regulatory fines if they don't comply. And this is why it's so important to make sure that you have a data architecture in place for your Salesforce deployment that takes care of every single regulatory compliance issue out there. So here are some of the customers of Informatica Cloud that are using us for data replication, and they're using us to make sure that their Salesforce reporting is up to date, to make sure that all their line of business stakeholders get the view that they want. And they're also making sure they do this to make sure that they meet all the compliance that's necessary as well. Some of the names you see out here, there's Actelion, Adobe, ADP, Intuit, Comscore, Oppenheimer Funds. A lot of these companies are delving in a lot of data day to day. So as a result, there's a lot of compliance that needs to be taken care of. There's a lot of reporting to do. And this is why you'll see that Informatica Cloud application for data replication is so valuable. And so with that, without further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass the ball over to Alan Schwab so he can show you how you can use Informatica's data replication app for both compliance as well as for reporting purposes. Alan, please continue.
Thank you, Ashwin, and welcome everyone. So I will start out by sharing my desktop, and we will jump right into a demonstration of Informatica Cloud and specifically our replication capabilities to support these use cases around reporting and compliance. Okay, so as I get into the demo here, let me just do a little bit of lay of the land here. So as you can see, I'm in a browser. I am about to log into Informatica Cloud, and I guess at this point, let me just throw out a couple of general comments about Informatica Cloud as we get into the demo here. So as you can see, first and foremost, this is a true multi-tenant cloud application. So there are a number of different cloud-based services within the application that are meant to satisfy a variety of different use cases. The specific one we're going to be focused on today around compliance and reporting is a service called data replication. And my goal today is to make sure that you walk away with a pretty clear understanding of just how easy and quickly you can use Informatica Cloud to set up your replication process to make sure that you do have a confident view of your Salesforce data for those reasons. Okay, so the best way to take you through data replication is to really show you what it's like to set up one of these jobs from scratch. And so that's exactly what I'll do here in the demo. Now you'll notice that after I had logged into my multi-tenant slice of Informatica Cloud, I navigated to a particular service called data replication. And I'm going to click on the new tab here, and we'll get going with exactly what it takes to set up one of these jobs. You'll notice as I go through this that everything about Informatica Cloud is really centered on ease of use. Everything is about being wizard-driven, drop-down lists, drag and drop, point and click, check boxes. So we really try to make it as easy as possible to try to leverage and use Informatica without having to have any deep expertise or training on the application itself. You'll notice that as we get into this, that across the top there are 5 steps in this particular wizard that help you set up a replication job. And really keep in mind that the premise or the context for this service is for the use cases of compliance and reporting, the whole goal is to confidently put in place a replication scenario so that you can trust that you always see the most up-to-date view of your data that happens to sit out in Salesforce. But now you can see a copy of that data locally behind your firewall and safely and securely on your network. So step number 1 of this process as we're walking through is to simply come in and give this job some sort of descriptive name. I'll call this webinar replication example. And the only other step, well, the next part of the step 1 is to simply pick what we refer to as a connection here. And I'm going to pick a connection that points me to my particular Salesforce org that I am interested in. Now, you may be asking, what is a connection? A connection is really nothing more than pointing our cloud service to your data. And so in the case of Salesforce, a Salesforce type of a connection is comprised simply of the username and password that we will use in order to access your Salesforce org. And you can see we will default to a common service URL for Salesforce and their API so that we can gain access to Salesforce. With this little information, everything else about Salesforce, as you'll see going forward, becomes drop-down lists and checkboxes. And you really need to know nothing about the Salesforce API itself. That's really all abstracted for you throughout the user interface here. Now, once we've chosen our connection to Salesforce, the next choice we need to make is, what are we trying to accomplish here? Are we replicating for the purpose of compliance, and therefore, perhaps we need a copy of our entire data set that is out in Salesforce? Or maybe it's for reporting purposes, and our reporting is a certain area of the CRM application. Maybe we want to do some reporting on leads or contacts or opportunities. And so we can go in and selectively choose exactly what will be replicated. For example, I can come in and I can choose account. I can come down and I can choose additional objects like contacts and opportunities and leads. And so it's a matter of simply saying, what exactly is it that we want to make sure we always have an up-to-date view of? And so I'll just pick a handful of these here. I think you'll get the idea. And we get a list of what we've chosen, and that is exactly what this service will maintain going forward, is these 3 objects. We have some other optional choices we can make here. In the event of a failure or some hiccup during the processing, Do we want to, for example, if we're in the middle of replicating account and there's a problem of some sort, do you want to ignore that for this particular run and continue with the other objects, or do you want to cancel processing for the entire batch job? You can also do some additional things like bring forward archived and deleted rows that happen to be out in Salesforce and logically deleted, but as we all know, for at least some period of time, those records continue to exist, so you can choose to bring those forward as a part of your replication locally as well. And with those choices, we can move on to step 2. Now, here in step 2, the goal is to identify where your data will end up. Where is this replicated copy going to go? And so in that case, I am going to choose a connection I have to a local Oracle instance here. Could be a variety of different databases, but I'm going to choose Oracle. And then you have the opportunity to optionally put in a prefix. And what's really being asked here is, and it alludes to some of the functionality of the service, is when this service creates these target objects in the target environment, in this case in Oracle, do you want to eliminate any potential conflict with any existing objects? And so you have the opportunity to prefix the objects with some sort of prefix. For example, I'll use webinar underscore. And so when this service goes out to Oracle and creates a new table for the account object, the actual name will be webinar underscore account. Okay. And just to give you a little sneak preview here, I happen to bring up a little administrative utility for Oracle where I can see all of the schemas and all within Oracle, and then within a schema. For example, I have a schema here called test data. I can see what objects happen to exist inside that schema. And you can see now I have just a handful of objects, and none of them are named with anything starting with webinar underscore. So hopefully when we run this, we'll see these the new objects show up, and we'll take a look at what was accomplished there. The key point here is you don't have to have those objects exist prior to running one of these replication jobs. So this really brings me to kind of the key benefit of this service, which is this service will fully manage and maintain that target replicated copy. So that means creating the objects to begin with the first run of the object, but equally importantly, it also means that it will manage and alter and maintain those objects as those objects change going forward. So if you were to run this service today and you get a copy of all of your schema in Salesforce and all of your data within that schema, and then tomorrow morning, your Salesforce administrator makes some changes to maybe the account object or the lead or opportunity object, those changes will be forwarded and replicated to your target environment as well, so that you always have an exact copy of your Salesforce environment. And that's really the goal of this service, is maintaining that exact copy. Now, a couple of other choices you can make here on step 2. As the expectation is you will probably run this recurringly over time, maybe once a day, maybe several times a day, maybe every 5 or 10 or 20 minutes. But whatever that recurring period is, do you want to do just a completely full refresh of both schema and data each time it runs? And if your data sets are low enough in Salesforce, you can choose to do that. But for a lot of customers, they really prefer to take the incremental approach, so that only things that have changed will be forwarded. And it's obviously a much more efficient processing model when you're talking about larger volumes of data. And then finally, you can make some choices here about what happens to the local copy when your Salesforce environment changes specifically. So if you delete a column or a row within an object, so a record gets deleted in the account object, or you remove a field from that account object, what do you want to do with those changes? Do you want to retain those locally because the purpose of this is reporting and you want that historical perspective, and so you want to keep that data and that schema, that column around? So you can make that choice here very quickly and easily. Now, without going any further in the demo and talking about these final 3 steps, literally this is what it takes to set up a replication job. I could come up here and click Save and either close, continue, or run, and this is a valid replication job that will either run on schedule, which we haven't done in Step 5 yet, or if I invoked it and said run right now, this is a valid job. I would replicate account, contact, and I believe I chose lead, and you would see those three objects show up in my local database. They'd get created, the data would be replicated over, and it is that easy, literally 2 steps in the process that are required. Everything else about this wizard is completely optional. Now, with that said, let's continue through the wizard and give you an idea of what other choices you can make here. During Step 3, and it's pretty self-explanatory here, but this is your opportunity to say, within the objects that I chose, and you'll see here it's very context sensitive, so it knows that I chose only the 3 objects from Step 1, and within any or one of those 3 objects, account for example, I may choose not to replicate the entire set of columns from that object. For example, you may not choose to replicate particular fields that just simply aren't needed and you don't care about. It could be description fields. It could be a nice sizable chunk of the record, and whatever it is that you don't want to bring over, maybe it is some description fields like this. You can simply add these to the exclusion list of fields, and in essence, those fields will be ignored for that particular object when the replication happens. Similarly, or I guess in a somewhat related fashion, you can also choose to be selective with which records are replicated. So again, another example here in Step 4 of the wizard, I'll use account as my example, and maybe we only want a particular subset of records coming across. It could be as basic as, you only care about North American records or U.S. records, even though your Salesforce instance may very well be a worldwide international deployment. And so you can make that decision here. You can filter your records accordingly in Step 4 of the process. Finally, the last step in the process here of setting up one of these jobs, and the last optional step is, when should this job run? And so do you want to leave this unscheduled because you're going to decide on sort of an ad hoc basis when this job should run? Or do you want to set up a schedule to have this job run? And if you choose to set up a schedule, then is it a schedule you had already created previously? And you can see I have quite a few different schedules that have been set up over the course of demonstrations. Or maybe we want to set up a brand new schedule to show you what that's like. And so I may call this something like webinar schedule hourly. And so we can pick what sort of a repeat interval it is. Is it monthly? And you get certain options when you choose monthly. Is it weekly? And of course those options change, all the way down to every n number of every n number of hours or even minutes. And so, if we go back to our hourly, and we could choose every 4 hours, every 2 hours, every hour. And so I'm going to arbitrarily pick 1 hour, set this up on our new schedule, assign the schedule to this job, and I have literally gone through the entire process of configuring a replication scenario to support my use case like compliance or bringing my data local for reporting purposes. So I'm going to do a save and a run, and when I run that job, you'll notice that we were dropped over into a different part of the Informatica Cloud application, a page called the Activity Monitor page, where we can see exactly what's going on. I can expand the view here, and we can see that it is in the process of going out and identifying whether these, there's all sorts of logic happening behind the scenes. First and foremost, it's making sure that, these objects do exist in our local instance, and if not, then it will go out and replicate or create those objects. Then, of course, it is replicating the data for each of those objects, and you can see that that has happened. And when the job finishes, we get dropped over to another page called a log page, where we can see the summary of what has transpired across all our different cloud services within Informatica Cloud. And specifically in this environment, I must not have had any leads in my system, at least none for that met the criteria that I had set up, but I did have some contacts and some accounts. So now if I jump back over to my Oracle environment, and I'm going to just step off of this schema and then step back on it so it gets refreshed. And so we go back onto the test data schema, and hopefully we see our three objects show up. Yep, here they are. Webinar account, because that was the prefix we chose, webinar contact, and webinar lead. I would expect no records in webinar lead because there was no data that satisfied our criteria. However, in webinar account, we should obviously see that data, and here we go. In fact, this is the data, the records that were brought over and replicated in their entirety, or at least, sans the fields that I chose to exclude. Everything else is here in the replicated copy in Oracle. And then again, just kind of to reiterate the comment made earlier, the real key is not only will this, as I go back to my Informatica Cloud, not only will this replicated copy be in place now, but it's going to get updated every hour, and the first thing that happens is we make sure the schema is continually in sync, and so if any changes need to be made to those target Oracle objects, in my case, the changes will be made, and then we make sure the data is in sync as well. So you always have an up-to-date copy of what's in Salesforce. Okay, so that was the demonstration of our data replication service, or DRS as we refer to it. Ashwin, I guess at this point, I'd be happy to open this up to questions if there's any questions out there.
Certainly, Alan. If you could just pass the ball back to me, we'll put the Q&A session. And folks, please do use the chat panel and ask whatever questions you have. So the first question that's coming here, Alan, is it's a question about the schema, so Salesforce schema. So if there's any changes to a Salesforce schema, how can they be implemented?
Yeah, great question. So I think I may have touched on that a couple of times during the demonstration, but let me expand on that just a bit. So whenever I was talking about, the schema changes that happen, in our experience, one of the big advantages that Salesforce provides to their user community is the flexibility and the nimbleness of the application itself. And so unlike a more traditional environment, if I were to pick on an on-premise CRM from past days like a Siebel, where it may have taken a large project team 6 months, 12 months, 18 months to spin up and roll out an implementation of Siebel, and the day that project went live, you almost immediately started queuing up feature requests and other requests to enhance the application and enhance the rollout. Unfortunately, in the olden days and with the on-premise version of CRM, you typically queued those up and the project team started to work on them, and if you were lucky, you got your change 6 months, 8 months later by when your requirements may have changed. The contrast to that, of course, is Salesforce, where it's very common, and in our experience it's quite common, that the administrators for your Salesforce org could very well be out changing Salesforce and implementing new requests and new feature requests literally on a daily basis. And so when that happens, that is, as you can imagine, that's a benefit and an advantage of Salesforce, but that's a significant challenge to integration companies like Informatica, because we're used to seeing relatively static environments on both the source and target side of an integration equation. And so this is the one service out in the market that really takes that into consideration and says, not only are we going to integrate and move and replicate data, but we're going to make sure that this ever-changing schema on the Salesforce side stays in sync, and we'll manage that part of the process as well. So that's really what I was referring to, is as your administrator makes changes, we will make sure those same changes happen in the target environment where your replicated copy exists.
Great. Thank you for that, Alan. The other question that's popped up here is whether you're able to use this data replication service to do any sort of lookups into any other applications or databases before replicating that copy?
Again, another good question, and the short answer, I'll give you a short answer and then I'll expand just a little bit, but the short answer is no. Data replication service does not expose to the user an opportunity to do something like a lookup. But the longer answer is you really have to think back about what the whole purpose of the replication service is. The purpose in life of this service is to make sure that, again, for the more common use cases like reporting and compliance, to make sure that you always have an exact copy of data locally inside your firewall, on your network. And the whole concept of doing something like a lookup is it sort of violates that paradigm, because typically folks are doing lookups for the purposes of validating data or potentially changing data, modifying, translating data, translating a code from its code into its descriptive text or something like that. And so it really violates the whole concept of an exact copy of data. Now, with that said, it is only this replication service that doesn't allow lookups. Informatica, in fact, if you recall at the very beginning of the demo, I dropped down the list of all of the different services that Informatica Cloud includes inside of the application. And there are a variety of other services that are sitting there for the purpose of satisfying other use cases like true application integration, and those services absolutely do allow you to do things like lookups. So it just boils down to which service you're using and what the purpose of using that service is.
Great, thank you for that, Alan. The other question here is, what kinds of databases are compatible?
Yes, so today, I'm going to give you, again, a two-part answer. Today, as you can imagine, the service itself has to understand and have the knowledge and ability to modify target schemas. So it has to know how to go in and create an object in Oracle or alter that object in Oracle, or any other target database that's supported. And so because of that, and because of the relative dominance of a small handful of databases out in the market, today we've kind of focused support for targets here into Oracle, SQL Server, MySQL, or you also always have the option of targeting flat files. And so if you prefer not to use a database, then you can replicate your Salesforce data into a series of CSV files, and we'll manage the layout of those files and the content of those files just like we would the layout and content of the tables within those three databases. As the market dictates, we will definitely look at expanding that list in the future, but today it's those three databases.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Alan. There's a question here about Salesforce custom objects. So if Salesforce custom objects are created to a particular schema, how does the data replication service know to include that in the schema?
Yeah, actually, Ashwin, I wonder, could you give me control back just temporarily? It may
Sure.
make sense to illustrate my answer with this one, and maybe there'll be others that are coming. I don't know, but I was going to point out. So as Ashwin is giving me control, the answer to the question is you absolutely do have the ability to automatically include those custom objects if you choose to do so. By default, if you recall in step one of the wizard, you had the opportunity to say all objects or just selected objects. That choice will dictate whether you have custom objects included automatically or not. And so if you've chosen all objects, the expectation is it doesn't matter whether you started with just the standard objects within Salesforce, account, contact, lead, opportunity, cases, contracts, etc. Regardless of that, when you choose all objects, if and when anytime in the future custom objects show up in your Salesforce org, whether it's because you have extended the Sales or Service Cloud, whether it's because you're installing some of the App Exchange applications and Force.com apps. All of those custom objects will automatically be included in that all category. Now, when you choose to select which objects are included in replication, then the custom objects in the future will not automatically be included. You would have to go back in and open up that selection list once again and choose those custom objects that you now see in the list. So it's expected behavior, but it gives you the opportunity to make either one of those happen.
Great, awesome. There's a question here about what if there's a failure, either on the Salesforce side or on the Informatica Cloud side?
Yeah, so, and I think I do have control here, so I'm going to actually share my desktop again and bring up the application. So if we go back into our job here, you'll recall that it was a simple radio button to decide what do we want to happen in the event of a failure here. So do you care, and is it important for your purposes that this replication be treated as a single unit of work? And so do you want, if the data, if the processing for one object fails, then what do you want to do for the remaining objects? Do you want to ignore the failure for that particular object and continue on? And then that object, even in a worst-case scenario, that object will be picked up on in the next processing cycle? Or do you want to kill the job, basically, and obviously notify the administrator that there was an error and stop the processing on this replication job? So that is the choice you have in the event of some sort of a failure.
Great. There's actually a follow-on question to the custom objects question. Okay. So how do custom fields get replicated?
Very similarly to custom objects, insofar as custom fields within an object are automatically included in the replication, assuming, of course, that particular object was chosen as one of the objects to be replicated. But custom fields within the object, like an account object, will automatically be included. And if you don't want to include those custom fields, then of course you can always go into step 3 of the wizard and exclude those fields for that particular object. But they are automatically included by default.
Excellent. We just have about 2 more questions here that we're going to answer. And the first one here is, how do you add data quality transformations?
Interesting question. So, data quality can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So I'm going to keep it at somewhat of a generic conceptual level and just say, data quality typically just means at a high level validating data, whether it's, the most common example might be you want to validate and clean and correct addresses so that if that's a need within your data, you can do that. It might be validating company names based on reference dictionaries like D&B and Hoover's, et cetera. But at a high level, we really, I kind of step back and say, the replicated copy, again, very similarly to the lookup question, replicated copies, the idea here is that they should be exact copies. And so one might argue that if your data is bad and poor in quality in Salesforce, then the replicated copy, if you're going to get true reporting and truly have a copy of your own data, it probably ought to be the exact copy once again. And so replication and the replication service doesn't necessarily expose the ability to do these data quality or apply these data quality routines. With that said, again, I would point you back to other Informatica Cloud services, such as the contact validation service and or the data synchronization service, where that is the sole purpose and life of those services, is to allow you to apply data quality routines and really clean up your data And I would argue clean it up where it needs to be cleaned. Really, if you're going to talk about data quality, I think the idea would be, and most people would agree, you want to clean your data at the source of record. And so, you don't want to clean your data as it's being replicated from Salesforce to your local copy. Instead, you want to clean that data and correct it and enhance it in Salesforce so that by the time the replication runs, it's replicating better, cleaner data. And so to do that, again, I would point you to some of the other services that specifically can allow you to do that. In addition, Informatica, although it isn't encapsulated in the form of a service here, Informatica is rolling out to the market of a whole variety of web service-based hosted data quality services to do anything from contact and company name correction and validation to address correction to a number of other data quality concepts, matching, deduping, and those are all available in the form of hosted cloud-based services, data quality services. So feel free to reach out to Informatica for more information on those, but those are also available.
Great. Thanks, Alan. And the last question I see here in the chat panel before we wrap up with next steps, can you perform some aggregations before replicating the data?
Yeah, again, and this is going to, I guess, it's going to be a bit of a broken record, but very similar to lookups and data quality, I would put aggregations in the same category. Again, you're trying to replicate data, and that's the use case we're focusing on here today, and so your data should be an exact copy. That said, the other services like data synchronization service, which is a service you would use to do things to satisfy use cases like application integration, or data integration between your operational systems like your CRM systems and your data warehouse, those are satisfied with the data synchronization service where, in fact, you can do things like aggregations and you can get your hands on a number of very sophisticated concepts, aggregating, slowly changing dimensions in the data warehousing arena. All of those are things that Informatica Cloud can handle through our concept of templates and being able to quickly and easily build out templates in a Visio environment and then deploy that template as a job into your cloud org and into your cloud environment. So the answer is yes, but again, not with the replication service itself. It would be one of the other services.
Thank you for that, Alan. All right, folks. So as far as next steps, for those of you that want to go ahead and try the data replication service, go to informaticacloud.com, and then you can go ahead and click on the free 30-day trial. That 30-day trial is going to give you access to every single integration application within Informatica Cloud. So if you go under the Applications tab, everything you see listed there, you'll have access to. So go ahead and just look at the Getting Started video, and once you've done with that, go ahead and click on Data Replication, and you can try out some of the functionality that Alan showed you today. So that's all we have for today's webinar, folks, and thank you very much for joining us. Have a great holiday and a very happy New Year.